So you decided to learn the Charge Blade. Well, allow me to be among the first to welcome you into the Church of Super Amped Elemental Discharge. Now, in order for me to teach you how to play this weapon, it is going to require going over a lot of the basics that are going to keep you alive long enough to perform the sick moves you're going to be able to do with the Charge Blade. And during those times, some of you might be questioning, do I really want to learn this? Is this really a weapon that I want to dedicate some time to? You might find your motivation waning. And for those of you that are in that camp, allow me to provide you with a little bit of a dopamine hit. This is what you're going to be able to do by the time you're done watching this video. Now, is that a wicked-looking combo, or is that a wicked-looking combo? Now, naturally, you're going to require quite a big opening to perform all that, so we're going to have to break it down in parts, and that is why this particular guide is likely going to be a little bit more complicated than usual. So let me reset the gauge here. You're going to see me do this quite often throughout the guide, because there's a lot of gauges to learn when it comes to Charge Blade, but before we even get to the gauges, we need to talk about control scheme. Now, I'm going to be showing you how things work from a PlayStation control scheme standpoint. I'm going to be showing an image on screen right now that is going to be showing you a PlayStation controller side by side to an Xbox controller, if that happens to be what you are using. And below that, you will see the most important PC control inputs that are going to be relevant for this tutorial. So whenever I tell you, I'm hitting triangle, you're going to know that, oh, in the Xbox controller, it means he's pressing Y. Oh, if I'm on mouse and keyboard, it means he's pressing the left mouse button, and so on and so forth. If I say, oh, I'm using focus mode now, that means that I've pressed the left trigger for both controllers, or the Alt button or mouse 4 if you happen to be on mouse and keyboard. So keep that in mind, screenshot this if you need to, put it on your second monitor, type it down, print it out, have a hard copy in front of you. From this point onwards, we're just going to be talking about PlayStation controls, and I will expect you to be able to identify what I am saying, because otherwise this guide will already be way lengthier than it already is, and it doesn't need to be that lengthy, okay? Because this is actually not as hard as it seems. A lot of people will tell you, oh my god, Charge Blade is the most complex weapon in the world. You'll never be able to learn a Charge Blade. It's like the easiest thing in the world. This is actually quite a simple weapon. It just has quite a bit of a ramp up to it. But once you get through that initial hurdle, it becomes super easy to use, and it is super satisfying to use as well. So, one of the first things that I like starting off with is focus mode. So right now I have focus mode to toggle, because you guys know Gunlance main and focus mode toggle on Gunlance, in my opinion, is just the default. When it comes to other weapons, and specifically in the case of the Charge Blade, focus mode on default is also pretty good. But you don't always want to be on focus mode. So focus mode also gives you that additional momentum forward. I'll teach you guys all about the fade slash and doing all of these things. But when you're doing a fade slash in focus mode, you're going to move more forward than if you're doing the fade slash without being in focus mode. Okay? So you'll want to keep that in mind whether or not you're in focus mode. Usually the way that it goes for me is I have it to toggle, and I will switch to focus mode whenever I'm in axe mode, doing chainsaw, doing all these things. I'll be in focus mode. And whenever I'm in sword and shield, I avoid being in focus mode unless I specifically need to. Because one of the things is, in focus mode, whenever you're trying to dodge, you're going to get this side hop before you get to a meaningful dodge. Whereas when you're in sword and shield mode, if you try to dodge by pressing X, you're just going to do this long dodge, which is more useful to dodging things. Whereas if you're in focus mode, you're going to have to dodge twice to get the long hop, and sometimes that hesitation is going to get you killed. I almost wish that in focus mode, they would just let us do the long hops instantly, rather than this, because you're going to spend more stamina. You're going to be in a much more compromised position. So my recommendation is you're in the offense, you're beating the crap out of the monster, toggle focus mode, get your precision hits in. You're in the defense, you're on the back end, toggle focus mode off, be more aware of your surroundings and get those longer rolls popping off. That'd be my recommendation for focus mode. Now let's just jump right into the weapon gauge. So, you notice on the top left-hand side, you have the symbol of a sword, the symbol of a shield, and the other symbol you might not recognize, but that is the symbol of an axe. And then followed by that, you have 5 little bottle-looking things. Now, those bottle-looking things are called phials, and there are 2 types of phials, which are dependent upon gun lengths, which are dependent upon the type of charge blade that you have. So if we actually go in here, and we go into change equipment. I'm not going to spoil things, but I am going to show you some of the monsters that, I don't think this is going to be a spoiler at all because this monster is in every Monster Hunter game, but I need to show you a different charge blade so that you understand how this works. So the charge blade that we have right here, if you look to the left-hand side where it says file type, it says impact phial. So an impact phial is a type of phial that deals stun damage. It is universal. Every monster takes damage from this impact phial relatively equally, and it is pretty much the type of charge blade that you can use against everything. But then there's a different phial type, which is called elemental phial. Now, the main difference between this is that elemental phial deals elemental damage instead of impact damage. So impact damage gives you stun. Elemental phial gives you elemental damage, no stun. Now, elemental damage is something that would require like its own video for me to explain, but basically you need to align yourself with the opposing element of the monster. And in case you are wondering, in Monster Hunter Wilds, elemental damage is actually really good. At least for the charge blade, from the testing that I've done so far and from what I've been hearing from other players, everybody is reporting that charge blade using elemental phial is actually fairly good. Now, some monsters, their elemental hit zones are not as good, so this is something that you'll have to test along the way and feel it out, but it is viable for you to go all out elemental phial if you want to. But for now, we're going to be sticking with impact phial. Impact phial, like I said, stun damage, true damage. Every monster gets like equally affected by it. Just be aware that there's a different type of phial, which is called the elemental phial. So the way that this weapon works is those symbols, the sword, the shield, and the axe, are going to be individual portions of the weapon that you are going to be powering. And the way that you power them is by using those phials that you see on the right-hand side. So let's start by talking about your basic combos. This weapon can be played either in sword and shield mode or in axe mode. And the concept of the charge blade is that you're going to be in sword and shield mode whenever you are on the defensive, whenever you are on the run, but you can also use it on the offensive, and there's a wide variety of attacks that are going to just swap you into axe mode organically, which we're going to be getting into. But the overall idea of the weapon is you play in sword and shield mode to charge up the phials that I talked about, and once you charge up those phials by doing your regular attacks, then eventually you're going to swap to axe mode to dish out the damage. That's kind of like the whole concept. So if you think of it as kind of like a builder-spender type of system or a generator-spender type of system, sword and shield is your resource generator. Axe mode is your resource spender for dishing out damage. That's like the overall concept of the weapon. So let's talk about the different types of movement that you can do with this weapon, because those are going to be very important in terms of you actually surviving. Because as you can see, you can move fairly fast, you can dodge pressing X. That is going to be like essential for you to learn how to kind of position yourself towards the monsters. But a really cool thing that the charge blade has is Fade Slash. Now, Fade Slash, if you happen to be outside of focus mode, is something that you can do pretty much after any attack by pressing a direction on your left stick and then pressing circle. So say, for instance, I just do an attack and then I press right circle, you're going to get this. Your character is going to move in that direction and do a slash. But it gives you a lot of mobility, and this allows you to kind of like keep up with your target. And you can also do this from focus mode, from neutral. So you just press left or right and press circle, and you're going to go into focus slash. You can also do it backwards and forwards. Like so. So this is very important for mobility, so you want to keep that in mind. And the other thing is, this weapon has guard points, which I'll get into detail a little bit further ahead. But basically, whenever you are doing a Fade Slash, if you notice, your shield is going to glow at the end of that animation. That is because during the end of that animation, your shield is active. You are actively blocking at the end of this. So it's a very good move for positioning yourself, and at the same time for being blocking at the end of it. So you can even do Fade Slash into block, and you'll be blocking by the end, which is a very effective way of just repositioning in the battlefield with an offensive move. And again, do keep in mind, in order to do Fade Slashes, it has to be after an attack if you are not in focus mode, or if you're in focus mode, you can do it from neutral. This is very important. You'll want to practice Fade Slashing a lot so that you know how to do it in order to position yourself the best according to where your enemy is and to avoid attacks in an offensive way. I understand that you're like, man, why is he talking so much about Fade Slash? This is potentially one of the most important parts of learning Charge Blade, is positioning. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most important parts about any weapon in the game, is how you're going to position yourself. Okay? Now, let's talk about actually attacking with Sword and Shield mode. So if you spam your triangle, you're going to get this very basic combo. This is your most basic combo. It's like a 3-attack thing. And if you try spamming circle, you're going to get this. Now, this is kind of weak, kind of whiff, so this can be charged. So if you hold circle, you're going to get this, but then it's still kind of like whiffs. See, the idea is that you release it immediately after it fully charges up. So when you get that sound, that like this, that's when you're meant to release it. And as you can see, you're going to do a charged double slash. This is the bread and butter for building gauge on this weapon. This is one of the most important moves, and it is actually quite forgiving in Wilds. As you can see, you can kind of like stay in there for quite a bit. In previous Monster Hunter games, it was much more punishing. You had to like really let go immediately afterwards, but you do want to get into the habit of releasing the second it's done charging because it's faster. So this is the attack that you want to be doing. Now, this attack has a couple of follow-up options that you can do. So the follow-up to this attack can be another triangle swing, and that's going to be a round slash. Now, this is, if you don't know what you're doing, this would be my go-to follow-up every single time. If you're a newcomer to Charge Blade, this would be my go-to every time. So you do the charge double slash into the triangle attack. Why? Because that gives you the round slash, and if you notice, shield is glowing at the end, which means you're in a defensive position, and you're going to be blocking if somebody hits you during that frame. So this is defensive, it's good, it's a nice follow-up, and you can keep on going. Now, once you start learning what you're doing, you can follow up this with also triangle circle, which is going to give you a shield thrust, which is a more kind of like offensive thing, because it doesn't leave you in a defensible position. But it also unloads the Phial onto the enemy, and it's just really good, and it opens up a couple of more options for your combos, and you can still follow up with other attacks afterwards. But so, this is kind of like bread and butter for your Sword and Shield mode in Charge Blade is hold circle, charge double slash and triangle, or charge double slash and triangle circle and do a shield thrust. These are kind of, again, you want to practice these, you want to learn these to the point where you can kind of like do them very, very easily. And remember, you can follow all of this up with Fade Slashes to reposition, okay? That's when things start getting more interesting. You do your charge, monster moves, you Fade Slash, reposition. Or you do your charge, shield thrust, monster moves, Fade Slash, reposition. Always keep in mind that after everything you do, unless you're in axe mode, you can Fade Slash to reposition yourself. Again, position. It's like the McDonald's thing, right? Location, location, location. Except in Monster Hunter, it's position, position, position. All right? But these are your basics. So now, let's talk about charging things up. We haven't hit anything yet, so you haven't really seen us generate charge. So like I told you, bread and butter is your charge double slash, so we're going to open up with that. So charge double slash. If you notice, top left-hand side, your files are now yellow. When you're in the yellow and you store your files, it is going to store 3 files. But as you can see, we have 5. So I wouldn't actually recommend storing your files on yellow. So you want to go again and you want to get them up to red. Now that they're on red, you want to go ahead and store your files. But what happens if you keep going? See, if you keep going, now you're going to start bouncing. As you can see, your blade's like superly overcharged. It's like it's melting away. And because it's melting away, every attack you do is going to bounce. Now, this time around, however, Capcom has been very, very generous because Capcom has said, hey, you know what? People don't know what they're doing with this weapon, so if it starts bouncing, let's just automatically store the phials in the shield. So if you mash triangle, it will actually store the phials in the shield, which in my opinion is the wrong thing to do because that leads to people playing sloppily because they don't know how to actually play their weapon, and they're going to be like, oh, I can just keep attacking and it automatically stores my phials. No, that's not how you do it. We're going to store phials the proper way. And the way that you store them is going to be by pressing your right trigger and circle. And that is going to store phials onto your shield once you get to the first stage of red. Okay, now that you've stored those phials, you might be wondering, all right, I got those phials. What do I do with them now? Because nothing is still charged. Well, the most important thing to charge is going to be your shield. And the way that you do that is going to be by, this is so weird. You're going to spam triangle circle twice, and then as it is popping off, you're going to interrupt it by pressing block. And you guys are going to be like, what? Yeah, see, when you do triangle circle, actually it's 3 times. When you do triangle circle, you're going to do this forward slash, which is an advancing slash in case you need to move forwards, right? And then after you do triangle circle again, it's going to go into shield thrust. And then after you do shield thrust, if you do triangle and circle again, it's going to do something called an amped element discharge. But you don't want to do an amped element discharge. So what you want to do is right as you are about to do the amped elemental discharge, you want to press block. So it looks a little bit something like this. And now if you notice on the top left-hand side, your shield is glowing. And if you notice in your own character, your shield is glowing. This means your shield is now charged. What is the advantage of your shield being charged? Well, now, whenever you start blocking attacks, if you do a perfect block or a guard point, which is something that I'll talk about later, monsters will take damage whenever they hit you. They're going to take damage back. But not just that, whenever we play in axe mode, which I'll also show you in a couple of seconds, the axe deals more damage because it is enchanted. So therefore, charging your shield is one of the most important things to do. Now, having said that, I only showed you one of the ways of charging your shield, right? Which is, if you guys remember, we're going to do triangle, circle, and then triangle, circle again, and interrupt midway through that, and that gives you the elemental round slash. There's another way of doing it, which is when you are loading your shield by doing right trigger circle, you can keep circle pressed, and that will automatically charge your shield and give you a guard point. See, that charges your shield. Much more efficient, much more cleaner, but your shield is now charged. However, there is yet a third way of charging your shield. And the way that you do that is after performing a shield thrust, which I showed you is following any attack you press triangle and circle, does a shield thrust. After performing a shield thrust, you can hold down, this is going to hurt a little bit for you guys, right trigger, triangle, and circle all at the same time, and that will also charge up your shield. So let's say we're doing this, and we have full phials, and then you're going to be going like, all right, I'm going to do a charge double slash into a shield thrust, which is just like hold down circle, and then triangle, circle, and then you're going to press triangle, circle, and right trigger. And that will also load up your shield. Now, the shield is going to be loaded up for a certain amount of time. Once that time runs out, apologies, once that time runs out, you will want to go ahead and reapply that. That is one of the most important things. You want to keep your shield charged up at all times. However, if that is all there was to it, it would be a little bit too simple because you see Capcom decided that they wanted to make the weapon just a little bit more complex than it has been in previous games. So this time around, you can actually charge your phials twice. So when you store the phials in the shield, you get the first set of phials, which as you can see, they're white. If you go ahead and you keep attacking, you can keep storing energy on the phials. As you can see, now they're full, but they're still on yellow. Again, always look top left-hand side. If you keep going, now they're full, but they're red. And if you once again store the phials one more time, you're going to do what I called overcharging your phials. And you guys are like, well, what's the advantage of that? Well, that's going to increase the amount of time that your shield is going to stay charged. And also when you actually use the phials, which we've only used them to charge the shield so far, they're going to deal more damage. So naturally, you will want to overcharge your phials, which means charging your phials twice. Now, for those of you that know about armor skills and Monster Hunter, you can use load shells, and that will take care of this particular portion. Whenever you load up on red, that will automatically give you the overcharged phials. I'll explain load shells a little bit later as we go through the video. So, once you get these phials done, and you also have your shield charged, let's learn how to charge the sword, because it is a charge blade. So you can also charge the blade. As you can see, right now we are charged with red. We are going to do the standard storing phials on the shield procedure, which is right trigger plus circle. But this time, we're going to hold down on triangle. And now, you would have charged your sword, except you held the triangle for too long. So we did the return stroke instead. Now, our shield charge is about to go away. You can see that by looking at the top left-hand side. It is now glowing red. This is usually a good time for you to go ahead and recharge your shield before you completely run out. So you'll have to be very aware of what your gauge is doing. It's going to keep flashing until it runs out, but we're going to just charge it real quick. So we're going to do right trigger circle, hold circle. There, shield is charged again, we're good to go. Now we're going to charge up on our phials again, and we're going to overcharge them. So we have the standard set of phials. Now we're in the red. So now, like I said, we're going to store the phials into the shield one more time, but this time we're going to hold down triangle. But the second it finishes charging, we're going to let go of triangle, and it's going to do something a little bit different than last time. Done. Bam. Now, if you notice on the top left-hand side, the sword is charged. What does that mean? You have imbued this sword with the power of your phial. If the phial happened to be an elemental type, like with the Rathalos charge blade that I showed you earlier, you would now be adding bonus fire damage into your attacks. But because this is an impact phial, you are now adding bonus impact damage into your attacks. As you can see, after every attack, there's an explosion. This also counts if you're doing your charge slash. This also gives your sword natural mind's eye, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it means your sword no longer bounces, ever. So even if you're in this territory where your sword's supposed to bounce, it no longer bounces. Now, you shouldn't have it like this, because as you can see, the damage is lower, so you'll not want to have it like that. But yeah. So if you're fighting like a monster has really tough armor and stuff like that, and you charge up your sword, you're not going to bounce off. You're going to be able to keep attacking, and you're going to deal this bonus phial damage. The other thing about the phial damage is that because it's dealing impact damage, if you continuously hit a monster in the head with a wave of attacks, you're going to eventually KO that monster because you're dealing impact damage. Even though I guess this one's kind of like resistant right now. Maybe we're not hitting the head properly on the dummy. There it is. See, it gets stunned if you keep hitting the head with this phial type. We're going to load up the shield again. So, loading up your shield, 3 ways to do it. You can back away in the video. I'm not going to keep showing it because this video is already going to be long enough as it is. Loading up your sword, I've also showed you how to do it. So, every time that your shield is charged, remember, to load up your sword, to charge up the sword, the shield has to be charged first. If your shield is not charged, you cannot charge the sword. So you go, right trigger, circle, hold triangle, and then release at the top. Boom. Sword is charged. So now let's talk about charging the axe, because you can also charge the axe. Charging the axe, there are 3 ways of doing it. One of those ways is wounds. As you can see, we have a wound right there. If we're going to focus mode, press down on R1. We're going to do a focus strike. Now the axe is charged, and we're also in axe mode. Once we're in axe mode, we can now press and hold triangle. Now we'll chainsaw mode, but only when the axe is charged from your focus strike. If you hold circle, chainsaw mode again. You can do it twice. And if you do it one more time, goes into amped element discharge. If you do it one more time, goes into amped element discharge follow-up. And then if you hold triangle and circle, you go super amped elemental discharge. A little bit complicated, a little bit crazy, and you guys are probably like tilting right now. This is absolutely insane. Requires practice. See, the way that it goes, in order to swap into axe mode, you're going to press right trigger and triangle. Okay? And then if you press right trigger again, it's going to swap to sword mode. At the beginning of swapping from sword to axe by pressing right trigger triangle, there is a guard point. And at the end of pressing the right trigger from going to axe to sword, there's another guard point. You'll notice that your shield will always flash white whenever there's a guard point. What that means is, if a monster is attacking you and you press your axe swap mode, you're going to do a guard point. And if the monster hits you during that, you are blocking. If a monster is attacking you and it hits you during this, you're also blocking. Okay? So keep that in mind. As you can see, our sword has been fully expended. We're going to now load into the shield, hold triangle, release, boom. We have sword again. Now, you don't have to charge sword. Charging the sword is kind of optional. Personally, I like doing it. A lot of people don't really care that much about it. Most important thing for this iteration of the Charge Blade, in my opinion, is keeping your shield charged and charging axe mode. See, right now, we don't have axe mode charged, which I didn't want to have it, because I want to teach you guys about the basics of axe mode. So let's jump into axe mode by pressing right trigger triangle. We're now in axe mode. So axe mode moves slower, as you can see. You can roll with it, but it's still a little bit clunky. This is why whenever you are moving around, getting up to a monster, you want to be in sword mode. But axe mode is needed to deal damage. So the way that it works with axe mode is, if you press triangle, it's just going to do regular attacks like this. If you press triangle and a direction, it is going to advance you in that direction and do an attack. It can be left, can be right, can be forward, and it can be backwards. And you can choose the direction that you are attacking in. If you press circle when in axe mode, it is going to use one of the phials that you have there. And it is going to do an attack that also includes the phials. Now, this attack has two modes, which is, this is number 1. Then you do it again after that, number 2. So, element discharge 1 and element discharge 2. And all those will do phials. If you keep going, on the third one, it is going to give you the amped elemental discharge. Which is this. Which would have unloaded a phial, but we ran out of phials. And if you want to keep going after that, you can press circle again, and that will give you the amped element discharge follow-up, which is a new move that we didn't have before. And it's this one. Bam. Which is really cool because it deals a lot of phial damage afterwards on the follow-up. And if you want to keep going a different route, you can go to the super amped elemental discharge, which is after the amped elemental discharge, you press triangle and circle. Amped elemental discharge. But we can't do it because our shield is not charged. You need to have a charged shield in order to do super amped elemental discharge. This is why I keep telling you guys that charging your shield is like one of the most important things. So, shield is now charged. We're going to swap over. And like I said, element discharge 1, element discharge 2, amped element discharge, and triangle circle, super amped elemental discharge. Now, if we had phials, those phials would be exploding all over the monster at that point. So this is kind of like the slow way of getting to super amped elemental discharge. The fast way is, if you mash triangle and circle a bunch of times while in sword mode, you're going to do this. Amped elemental discharge into super amped elemental discharge. So it's a shortcut if you just mash triangle and circle. Okay? You get a shortcut that just takes you right into super amped elemental discharge. But unfortunately, there has been a change that requires you to always do amped elemental discharge before you get the super amped elemental discharge. Or is there? Because of course, there are other ways. So let's go ahead and teach you guys some of those. So we're going to go ahead and tell this guy to bring down the pain by getting into smash mode. So the monster is going to attack us, and we're going to be using blocks. If you block with a perfect block or a guard point, you can go straight into super amped elemental discharge. So it works like a counter. Another way of doing it is if you have a small bomb, you can do it yourself. I actually don't know if I have small bombs. So I actually had to go and buy small barrels in order to craft the barrel bombs. But in case you guys don't have barrel bombs, you're going to need some fire herbs and some small barrels that you need to buy from the provisioner. And then you can craft a couple of barrel bombs, which are going to be useful if you want to do some techie stuff with Charge Blade. Personally, I don't like using this, but because this is a guide and I'm trying to show you all of the different ways of doing things, I figured I'd go ahead and show you this as well. So we're going to bring out the barrel bombs. And what you can do if you want to get that shortcut into super amped elemental discharge, let me just get the shield loaded up. If you want to get your shortcut into super amped elemental discharge, you want to go ahead, place down that barrel bomb, draw your weapon, and then perfect block, and then you can go into super amped elemental discharge. This is going to require a bit of timing. And I know that you guys have been seeing all of these dry super amped elemental discharge, probably wondering, what's the point of doing this super amped elemental discharge thing? It seems so underwhelming. It's because we haven't been doing it with Phials. See, if we do it with Phials, what you're going to be looking at is this. Looks a little bit more powerful, right? So just keep that in mind. That's what you're expected to be doing. It's just I haven't been charging Phials every single time to try and make things somewhat simple and not have to constantly interweave every single time charging the Phials. But yeah, that's another shortcut of doing it. So you can either block, you can perfect block, or you can put down a bomb and you can block in order to do it. So let's go ahead, put this back into smash mode. Because now we're going to be talking about the guard points. So one of the easiest guard points to do is going to be right trigger triangle. And that's your guard point. So you're going to time that right as the hit is coming. And that also allows you to go into super amped elemental discharge. I actually whiffed that. But you don't have to time it perfectly. That's the other thing. You can just go from a regular block as well into super amped elemental discharge. All you have to do is block it. It doesn't have to be perfectly timed. Let me go ahead, load up the shield. It doesn't have to be perfectly timed, but perfectly timed just usually gives you the most amount of benefits. So that's why you'd want to do it that way. Especially because doing guard points also reduces the amount of impact that the monsters are able to do. So yeah. All right. Now, let's talk about when you have your axe mode charged, which we do right now. Whenever you have your axe mode charged, you can actually keep the buttons of your attacks pressed, and it is going to linger in the monster and kind of like get this chainsaw effect. So, like that. As you guys can see, the stuff just kind of like lingers, but you have to keep the button pressed. This also works on the Amped Elemental Discharge, the Amped Elemental Discharge follow-up, if you happen to be doing that one. And even the Super Amped Elemental Discharge, if you keep the button pressed, it will also linger. It has that lingering hitbox effect. Now, earlier we saw that we can charge the axe by popping a wound, like that one right there. This charges the axe. Another way of charging the axe is a perfect block. So if we wait until the hammer comes down, perfect block, and then press triangle, that gives you the Savage Axe as well. The other way of doing it is finishing a mount, which I can't show you on the training dummy here. But if you finish a mount, that is also going to charge up your axe. So now let's go ahead, turn off the thingamabob here. Oh, just turn that off, please. Thank you very much. Select mode, stand by. Okay. And now that we kind of know how stuff works, I'm going to be changing to a different charge blade. Now, if you guys remember, in order for us to fully charge our phials, in order to get to the overcharged phials, we have to go to red, charge that up, and then we have to go to red again, and charge that up, and that's the overcharged phials. However, there is a skill in the game that I mentioned earlier, which is called load shells. Now, I do have a charge blade here that is not a spoiler monster or anything like that. It's just a bone tree. Which is the Bone Strong Arm 4, which as you can see right there on equipped skills, it has load shells 2. You can also get this in the form of decorations to place on other charge blades. And by the way, I consider load shells in this iteration of the game to be literally the most important skill to have for a charge blade. Load shells, because of what I'm about to show you. If you notice all of this time, whenever we are charging our phials, whenever we're storing them onto the shield, we're doing it twice to get the overcharged phials. But when you have load shells, you only have to do it once. That is why load shells is potentially the most valuable skill for any charge blade player, at least from my personal opinion. So with this, we can now charge the shield, and we're already pretty much good to go, and then go to red again, and charge the sword, and we're once again good to go. And then you can go and see if you can, like, pop a wound or something. Or, like, just block an attack with good timing on a monster. And boom. Now, you're all charged up and good to go. And now you ask me, okay, Rurikhan, when I'm all charged up and good to go, what should I be doing? Well, in my opinion, it depends on a lot of things. So, is the monster moving a lot? Let's say the monster is trying to move a lot. What I would recommend is, like, stick with your sword and shield, attack him with the sword and shield, try to catch him off guard, do all of the shenanigans, right? But if the monster is, like, relatively still, it depends on how many things you want to hit. If you want to go for the head, you can go straight up into amped elemental discharge, which, like I told you, is just like mash triangle and circle a bunch of times. And then once you get there, follow it up with another circle input for the amped elemental discharge follow-up. And then I would probably go into circle attacks to kind of like keep punishing. Then go into amped elemental discharge again, and then the follow-up. Then if you see the monster is about to get up, what you want to do is either when you get to the amped elemental discharge, you can follow it up with triangle and circle for the finisher. So as he's getting up, you're smacking him with the super amped elemental discharge, which is pretty friggin' good. So that would be kind of like one of my go-to. If you want to just like loop a combo for a while, you can just do 2 circle combos. So 1, 2, then reset with the triangle, and then circle again. And keep looping this, which doesn't spend phials, by the way, when your axe is charged. So you can just keep looping this. And then triangle to reset. And then again, if you see the monster's about to get up, you might want to go and do the amped elemental discharge. But me personally, I like going amped elemental discharge into follow-up. That's like my favorite. So you go amped elemental discharge, follow-up, amped elemental well, this goes into super amped elemental discharge, but because usually you want to finish at some point, right? But the way that I go is I go amped elemental discharge into amped elemental discharge follow-up, and then after that, you press circle again, and you go back into amped elemental discharge, and I just keep looping that. I realize it is a little bit tricky. There's a lot of stuff to learn. You might have to rewind the video, watch it all over again, send this to your friends who happen to try to be Charge Blade mains and all of that good stuff. Do also remember that if a monster is moving a whole lot, you might consider just like, okay, look, this monster is being way too aggressive. You can also just do a much more basic combo of smacking him around with your Phials, right? You can go just 1, 2, 1, 2, shield strike, 1, 2, triangle, circle, shield strike, right? You can keep at it because you have Phials, like your blade is charged, so you're dealing a decent chunk of damage. And then remember, you can use Fate Slash to reposition midway through those combos. You can kind of like go around the monster. There's a lot of things that you can do once you start learning the different combos, but you have to like practice with it. But it's all about flowing into these sword and shield combos, right? So you want to keep that going whenever you don't have a lot of like openings, right? You stay in sword and shield mode, and you can just kind of like explore doing damage. Then whenever the monster goes down, that's when you can just either straight up go into Amped Element, right? And then circle. And then follow it up with another circle. Then you can go into Amped Element again. And then follow up. And then another circle. And at any point in time, you can go from Amped Element into follow up, into Super Amped, or you can just skip the follow up bit and go from Amped Element into Super Amped Element. But this is all about how long do you have to actually punish the monster. Because usually the Super Amped is like, oh, the monster is about to get up. That's when you finish with the Super Amped. At least that's the way that I do it. So the Super Amped is usually not your opener, because you can do so much more damage with Chainsword, right? That you want to keep up that damage going. The one that I like I said, I like doing the... Right now we don't have Axe mode. Let me get that. I like doing the one where I go amped into follow-up, into circle, and keep rotating that. So this is the one that I like doing when the monster is down, right? Then circle again. Then you can go into amped again. And then if you see, ooh, monster's about to get up, go into super amped. Boom. To kind of like finish it up. And that would be the way that I would play. Now, a couple of more things. So far, you guys have seen me usually draw into sword mode, right? You do your little draw thing, which is like, oh, press triangle. And you just draw your weapon and you do your attack. You can also draw into axe mode. So you can just go R2 or right trigger. You draw into axe mode. And if your axe is charged, you can keep the button pressed. And it does the little chainsaw thing as well, right? So another thing that you can do is if you happen to be, you know, jumping off of a ledge, you can press down on the block button, and it will also do that, which is just like, this is the basic jump attack of the Charge Blade. You just press down right trigger, and you get this. And you can hold it if your thing is charged, if your axe is charged, in order to keep that going. You can also... I understand there's a lot of mechanics here. You can also jump off of a ledge by pressing triangle and circle, which is your advancing slash. And you can jump off of a ledge with that, and your character will do this. Usually I find the axe mode superior because it deals more damage, but that's another option that you have. You can just be coming off of here, press triangle, bam. You can also attack it with the sword if that is something you prefer. You can also jump off and attack it with the sword. So these are all things that you can do. But a really cool move for the Charge Blade is if you have a sliding slope like this, you can actually just be running and then press triangle. And your character will do like this sliding slash. Then press triangle and you'll jump up. And you can even go from the sliding slash, triangle, and then shield for an axe drop, which is really, really good. So if you have a slope and you're fighting a monster, this is a really good way of dealing mounting damage. Jump up, bam, slam it in his face. Most weapons can do this. I don't think I talked about this in the Gunlance, but most people know about the sliding attacks. It's just that in the Charge Blade, I find it so exceptional that when there's a slope, I'm usually just like constantly going up and down, like, whee, bam. Just doing that on repeat because it's fun. Then if we go into Sacred, there's not a whole lot to say about Sacred. You can just like slash away, you know, you slash at stuff from Sacred. The dismount attack, I don't like it very much because it's kind of like hard to hit most attacks, which is if you press triangle and circle, you're going to do this dismount attack. But it's kind of like hard to hit that consistently, so I'm not a big fan. A good thing, though, is if your blade is charged like this, you'll also deal your Phial attacks whenever you're attacking a monster, which this is quite meaningful. Deals a lot of damage when you're chasing a monster down, so that's pretty good. But another thing that you can do from Seikret is you can just jump off of Seikret by pressing cross, and then again, right trigger, boom, and you can do your axe attack from there as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a whole lot of mechanics. You might want to rewind, watch some stuff again, you know, play alongside, try to figure it out. But this is most of the stuff that you need to know about the Charge Blade. Hopefully this was useful for you to learn how to do Super Amped Elemental Discharge and all the other crazy things that you get to do with Charge Blade. I'm sure there's going to be something that I will have missed, simply because it is incredibly complex, but this should be enough to get you started with the weapon. This has been it. If you guys enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all that jazz, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.